Awesome. Welcome to the Dirt Podcast. This is Coffees with Coaches. So we're going to talk about some training and we're going to talk about some gearing today. Loretta and I are always excited to get on the line with each other and talk about different topics within our community. So like I said, the topic today is just about hydration and different ways that we can carry our gear on the go for our races. I think this is pretty pertinent this time of year because as spring rolls around, we're going to be gearing up for some of our summer and fall races. So I think now is a great time to, start thinking about how we're going to gear up and practice for those races to come. So Loretta, how are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. And I guess before we dive into it, I just wanted to mention to the listeners that we always do Q&As at the end of the episode. So today we have a really awesome Q&A that a listener asked us a few days ago. As well as, since we're going to be talking about gear, we have a promo code for Ultraspire. I don't know if anybody's heard of them. They're only super huge in our industry here. But we'll have that promo code ready for you guys at the end of the episode on OMR's webpage. So Loretta, you just told me that you came back from a hair appointment and it looks great.
Yeah. I was asked last night by a friend to do a race, and I like to get my hair done before a race. That's one of my feel goods. Like, okay, I feel good. I can race good. I'm strong. I'm confident, kind of thing. So raced and got my hair done. And tomorrow I'll be doing the Cal Haven Trail Ultra, which is a 33.5 course, point to point, starting in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and ending in South Haven. And I will be doing it with a team. And there will be 6 of us. I am the 4th leg. And so I'm super excited. I don't get to participate in relay events very often, and a shorter event. My leg is 5.8 miles. So a whole different kind of game for me tomorrow. So the last time I did it was, I think, 2014. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm excited for you too. It's just such an interesting team building kind of atmosphere to our individual sport, So that's cool. Are you going to be in a van with people? Are you going to be cheering them on that way?
Yep. We'll have a van meeting us at different checkpoints. Our team likes to be creative and wear a costume. So we're called Six Pack to Go. And we are all going to be dressed up as a pop. So I'm Dr. Pepper.
Oh, wonderful. And okay, so this race is going to be short enough to the point where you're probably not going to carry too much hydration or gear on you, right? But, just knowing you, I know you have some races coming up during the summer and the end of the year, and you're probably already thinking about how am I going to carry all my food? How am I going to carry all my water? So I kind of just want to go down the list today and talk about different strategies for carrying our essentials out on the trail and some of the pros and cons of each of them. I think no matter how experienced we are, sometimes we can either get into a rut of doing just one thing and not really knowing other styles that are out there, or if you're new to the sport and you don't understand, or maybe you're coming from a road background, if you don't really know, hey, what are my options and what are the pros and cons of each? I think that's a pretty important thing in our sport for sure. So I guess to start off, packs, running packs. Pros and cons. What do you think about when an athlete comes to you and says, hey, I'm thinking about grabbing a pack?
So I think I like to look at each race individually. Like, what kind of event is it? Is it a point to point? Is it an out and back where you're going to be at a aid station a few times? Is it a looped course? How long is the loop? Do you have crew? Are you self-supported? So I think those are the things that I like to kind of talk about before we even talk about what piece of gear am I going to use. But as far as if we've settled in on we're going to use a vest, I feel like people really should go and try some on and make sure that they fit well, and definitely try them in their training runs, make sure there's no chafing or issues with that, and get something that's really comfortable for them. Oftentimes people ask me what I use, I share, but I also, everybody things fit so different on everyone. So I think it's really important to get out and try some, or at least order them and try them and see what works for you. What's your thoughts on hydration packs?
That's awesome. I like that you mentioned, taking a look at the course and taking a look at the aid station stops is huge. When I think of packs, I think that they are the most kind of bulletproof or, foolproof plan to tackle an ultra marathon of any distance or even a race that's shorter, just because you have so much carrying capacity. But when we look at, you know, a race, if there's going to be 8 every 2 miles, or maybe you're doing a 1 mile loop, maybe that's a little bit overkill for you. So I think, you know, just going in and identifying like, hey, there's only going to be 8 every 5 to 10 miles. I'm going to need a little bit more carrying capacity on me. Then it's pretty much a solid bet that like a pack is going to be near the top of the list for
Sure.
gear that you need for sure.
And I
I
feel
guess
like it's kind of a security blanket, right? When you get out there, because you can pack everything that you need into that pack. You can pack some of your nutrition, your hydration, maybe your phone can go in there. Even I will often pack like a really light windbreaker jacket that just like packs down into a pocket, because you just never know if you might get a light rain or some wind, you know, and it's light enough that it's not going to bother you. Now, one thing for me with packs that I found is I don't really prefer using the hydration bag in the back of a vest. I prefer to have the collapsible bottles with the long straws in the front, because it's just more accessible to me. What I found is when I was putting it in the back, I wasn't always drinking as much as I thought I was, because I couldn't see it. And then, or I would get worried about drinking too much because I didn't want to run out because I couldn't see it. So moving it to the front was really helpful for me. Another thing I find out about, or find for me, with if I'm wearing a vest and I have a crew, they can easily swap out those bottles. So I always have extra couple of bottles where I finish, I come into aid, I throw them the bottles, they slip some in my vest, and I just keep moving. So it's a pretty good time saver for me too.
for sure. Yeah, those are all good pros. I like the cons of just pack adjustment and how it fits. Let's keep on the pro bandwagon for a second, just to kind of keep it nice and orderly. But, you know, like pros being, yeah, they're easy to switch out. I even know people that, you know, they'll switch out their entire vests. Maybe they have 2 that they're used to, or they have one type of vest, but they have 2 exact copies. So they'll just have their crew load up their second pack, you know, as the way that they want it. So that way all they have to do is take a pack off, put another pack on, and then they're gone. That would be more of a like very streamlined approach to your next ultra marathon. It may or may not be necessary for most people. But yeah, you know, like I think another pro is that you can really prepare for just about any circumstance, and you do have a lot of modular options. Like I know people that have these attachments to put their poles on, or maybe they sew something onto their pack so they can hold their poles. You can hold your keys, you can hold other collapsibles, you can stuff your windbreaker in if you get nice and warm. So I think like in a runner's repertoire of tools, like you definitely having a pack, even if it's just for a training run, is great, because especially this time of year, it's like you're probably going to be taking your windbreaker on and off about like 10 different times, depending on if you start and stop, you know. So just being able to stuff it in the back is great.
Right.
But yeah, the cons, one of the big cons for me is just what you said, is that your pack is going to fit differently depending on how much weight you have on it, right? So like I know when I start off and I'm using my pack, and what I like to do is the 2 soft flasks in the front. You know, when they are full, the pack fits way differently than when they're empty. And you kind of got to get used to what it's going to feel like to have, you know, a couple ounces of water banging on your chest, especially for, you know, 15, 20, 30 hours at a time. But that all comes down to training with your equipment beforehand and knowing how it's going to fit. Do you have any other cons that you don't necessarily like about packs?
Yeah, but another thing I don't really prefer about packs is the heat. I'm a hot runner. I run hot, and you know, the less layers I can have on, the better. So if I can, you know, lose that part of heat, I will, if it's a race that's conducive to not wearing a vest.
Oh gosh, that's huge. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I tend to gravitate away from packs more often than not, because I notice that it's just another thermal layer, you know? So if you have a tank top on or a race singlet or whatever it is, you're still going to be generating a heck of a lot of heat, especially if you're in 60, 70-degree weather. So me personally, to just get a pack off my back just feels so freeing, because your sweat can evaporate and therefore cool you down. So since I get so hot in packs, if it's above 50 degrees, I'm usually going shirtless with a pack on. In that case, I have not had a pack yet that doesn't chafe somewhere. And
Yes, I was going to add that.
that's not to say that all packs are bad packs, right? Like it's just when material is on your skin and you get sweaty, you're going to have some sort of friction binding in some spots. So one of my strategies for a race that I did last year was I know exactly where that spot is, and it's always on my chest from that little plastic piece that clips it together, right? So I put a piece of athletic tape across my chest and then went shirtless, and I was fairly decent, but again, it comes down to like training with your equipment and seeing where those fault points are going to be.
And sort of planning ahead, because where I've gotten into trouble is I never have any problems with running or rubbing with my pack if I have a tank top or, a long sleeve on. But where I've gotten into trouble is I'm out on a long run. It's hot. I take off my tank top. Now I'm down to my sports bra. Well, I wasn't prepared. So I didn't, put any squirrel's nut butter on me, and now I'm chafing and it's bad. So if you're going to do that, think about that, because it could not end as well as you hoped.
Yep. And I used to be of the opinion that chafing, schmafing, whatever, like I can fight through it. Like that's not something that's going to slow down my pace ever. But when you get that chafing spot in the wrong place and it just keeps grinding away, like it can be devastating for sure, Yeah.
I was at a 100-mile race. Actually, it was Brazos Bend this year. And there was a younger runner, very first 100. I mean, actually had only started running at all like 8 weeks before this 100-mile race and decided to do it. And he got so chafed. By the end of the night, he was walking like he'd been riding horse for days. I mean, because he hurt so bad, but he was determined to finish the race. But yeah, so it can really mess up your race.
God, yeah, and those horror stories are just brutal, especially when you see it actually out on the course and somebody battling with it. I guess too, another thing with packs I find as a con is that since you have so much storage capacity, most people are going to pack their fears in a race or in an effort, right? So like you got somebody can carry 2 liters in the back and then a total of another liter in the front and then all of your gels and all of your everything. And all of a sudden you have a 10-pound piece of equipment just on your chest. So it's one of those things where you want to be efficient with your gearing selection, right? Like you want to have the option to be able to carry more, but you don't always want to use that option.
Right. I agree, because I don't really like to have that extra weight on me, right? And so thinking about how far is an aid station and how much do I really need of water or nutrition so that you're not overpacking, because if you get into overpacking, it's just going to weigh you down, and that RPE is going to go up the roof because you're, working so hard because you have an extra 10 pounds on you.
Yep. I guess another con would be too is that personally, I have a couple vests and some of them are fairly simple in design where it's like a total of maybe 5 pockets. But a lot of them nowadays, they have so many pockets everywhere that it gets a little confusing, especially when you're like kind of like bonked or cracked at the end of like a long race. It's just like, which pocket is my trash pocket? Where did I have that one favorite goo that's been stashed for that, like when I'm in a rough spot, like shoot, like where's that extra like bar on my back or whatnot. So sometimes it's like you get to the end of a race, you can't remember exactly where everything is. And all of a sudden you're at an aid station, like flipping through all your pockets, still not able to find that one piece of gear that you need. And then going off down the road, spending mental energy or spending, stress, just trying to think about what's in your pockets.
Yeah, so many times it happens to me in the back of the vest because, of course, you can't reach it very well when you have it on, and they often are divided into 2 pieces, and then I can't figure out which piece it's in, and I can feel it, but I can't find it. That is exhausting. And then I don't really want to take my vest off, because once I take it off, especially if it's a cooler race and I've been sweating back there and then taking it off, then I'm freezing, so I don't want to move it. So but I just go without what's ever back there because I just don't know how to get to it.
Yep. So in a lot of those things that we just mentioned too can be mitigated by having a system for race day and practicing, knowing that like, hey, this pocket is my trash pocket. So when I get to an aid station, I know, dig into that pocket, throw it away, so that it's not rubbing up against me. Or, knowing that like, hey, I like, a total of 1 liter in the front and maybe a little bit in the back, or whatever it is. I think, that like there's a pro and a con to everything. Like if you have a lot of carrying capacity, great. That's a pro if you need it during the race, but it can also be a con if you're not accustomed to it or efficient with that system.
For sure. I have one more that I think just to think about is a little bit of a con and a little bit of a tip. I think it happens more with hydration packs because you can carry more water. If it's cold, it may freeze. I experienced it my first time, actually, the race that I'm getting ready to run, Calhaven. I was doing the solo one year, and it was colder than I expected. And actually, by like the first aid station, my straw was froze up. I couldn't even drink anything, so I just took off my vest and threw it to my crew because it was kind of worthless to me at that point because it was too heavy, couldn't drink from it. So I do often recommend to my athletes to cut a little bit of like vodka, into the, just a small trace amount, just to keep it from freezing while you're running, and making sure if you do that, you run it through the whole line, not just put it in your hydration bottle.
I hadn't even thought about that, but you're right. I have ran in seriously cold conditions. All of a sudden, all of your lines are frozen, and it's like, well, what do I do now?
Yes.
And one thing that so I've never cut vodka into my bottles, but I've heard of other people doing that.
Yep. It
So
works.
that's a great tip. What I usually do in cold weather is I will suck through the nozzle, drink, and then blow all of that water back into the bottle. Because if you have water like in mass, it's not going to freeze as easily as the line that's in the tube. Of course, that's not foolproof. It might buy you another hour or two, but if you're doing a race like the Frozen Otter, that one I did in 2020, and all my lines were completely frozen. There was nothing I could do. And at that point, like, even though I had my jacket around my pack, it just wasn't warm enough to keep
Right.
everything
Yeah.
operable.
And there comes in adaptability. Okay, I threw my vest off the side. Now what am I going to do? Because I'm only at like mile 5 maybe, and I have 30 more to go, so you have to be able to kind of roll with it. But if you are listening to us now, you'll have some tips to kind of prevent it. I think another con or tip I would like to share is that I can't stand sloshing. So if you make sure when you put your water in and you sort of burp the air out of it, you can eliminate the sloshing, because the sloshing can really get annoying.
Beautiful. Yep. And it's annoying for the runner and for everybody around them. It's
Yes,
just
we
like
all hear the sloshing.
everybody's had that one guy that has their mile turned on, like in a conga line or something like that, their mile alert, and you're with them for like 20 or 30 miles. And it's just like, oh, here we go again. Here we go again. I just want to tune out. It's almost the same thing with sloshing. You just keep hearing it and keep hearing it and keep hearing it, especially if you don't have any music or anything. It's like nails on a chalkboard after a couple
Yeah.
hours.
So I have another funny story.
Mhm.
So I wear my collapsible bottles in the front of the vest. So this is another tip. So when you wash them, make sure you replace all parts, because there's like little components that go in the straw area. So I didn't necessarily have that little component, and I'm running, and all of a sudden, they're on the front of me on my chest, and they start squirting water out because they didn't have the seal.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a pretty funny run that day. I got made fun of quite a bit, but
Ooh, you know what? Here's a good pro for packs, is that it keeps all of the mass around your center of gravity, right? So like, even though it is not too thermally efficient, like it's going to hold on to a lot of heat, it does require less energy to move that mass down the road or down the trail. And a good example of that is, say, if you have bottles in your hands and you have a low arm cadence where they're kind of swinging down past your hips and you're coming up, you have a lot of rotational momentum that's just swinging that water forwards. And especially if you have a 20 ounce bottle, your arms are going to get really tired if you're not trained up for it. So you're going to have all this mass swinging around you. Whereas if it's on a vest, it's so close that it really doesn't pull you or torque you in different directions.
right.
So, well, I think we covered packs pretty well. Is there anything else that you want to say before we move on?
No, I think I'd like to end with making sure that you do really practice with them. Some of the things that has happened to me is, so let's say I wear my collapsible bottles in the front. When you start out, they're full, so they hold in place. But as you go and you're sipping, they may start to, move around. Yeah. So you might want to think about that and have a plan for that, because that drives me absolutely insane. And then sometimes, the straw, because I like the long straws, if it's not sitting right, it starts hitting me. The straw starts hitting me, so I have to, figure out how I'm going to deal with that. So I don't know. Do you have those issues, or is that just me?
No, I have those issues too. And I actually just told my girlfriend about trimming the line on her pack.
Yeah.
So like a lot of packs, it's just a standard, I think it's like 3/8 inch line. So you can go to any hardware store and replace that line if you cut it too short or if you want a longer one. But a lot of them come super long. You just take that nozzle piece off at the end, you cut it down a couple inches, you size it up right, and then you don't have all of this extra line floating around your shoulder, hitting you in the face or whatever. So I actually trimmed up some of my bottles because the same thing, they were just like right up on my cheeks. And every
clunk,
time I,
clunk, clunk, clunk.
yeah, they like hit me in the cheeks. They just get slapped, you know? So yeah, you can do that. But yeah, with those collapsible bottles too, like I have personally found that getting them inside and outside of a pack is tough, especially when you're quick and on the go. Because a lot of these packs, they have this pocket where you put your water bottle into, but there's another smaller pocket on front of that pocket. So if you have trash, if you have gels, whatever, it's going to kind of bind things up, and then you can't really push that flask down because it's soft, you know?
Right.
So one thing that like I'll do is I'll blow a lot of air in once it's filled up with water and try to keep it a little bit more rigid. So I can
That's
push it
smart.
down.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to take everything out of your pockets and put them back in, you know? So it will add a little bit more time in an aid station, but hopefully the idea is that you can carry enough water that you can make that time up and not have to stop so soon.
I did think of one more con.
Mm-hmm.
Cleaning, if you're using the pack in the back, cleaning that is not the most fun.
God, no, it's not.
Especially if you put a flavor or something in it.
Yeah. Because then, you know, like I've ran into the problem where it's like everything will taste mildly like that flavor, but not enough to the point where it's appetizing. So it's like you go out on your next run and you're like, oh man, I know I just put water in here, but it kind of tastes like triple berry. Like, oh, this is terrible, you know? So as far as I'm concerned, like there's not really a way to quickly like almost do like a, you know, like a flavor cleanse from your bottles.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, I guess the next one that I want to talk about is just the bottle. Hard bottles, soft bottles, one-handed carry, two-handed carries. What are some pros that you have with just going into an ultra race with handhelds?
Yep. So that's usually my choice is to do a handheld. I prefer the soft flask because I feel like I use the ones that have a strap, so it goes around my hand. So I'm not really doing the work of holding it. It's just hanging in my hand. So I think that's, we'll start with pros again, I guess. And so I think that's a huge pro for me. Easy to fill up at aid stations. You know, you just get there. If you give it to an aid station person, they'll quickly, you know, refill it. But I also have extras. So I usually have a crew so they can just swap that out with me really quick. I have everything I need in that. And the thing I like about the handheld too is the one that I use has a little pouch, so I can put my base salts in there or my untapped, whatever I might need in there to quickly get to. And so that really is helpful for me.
Absolutely. I guess a pro for me would be that it's probably the easiest method to rehydrating at an aid station. I just did the Hennepin 50 last year and I had 2 hard bottles on me. I personally like the hard bottles because I don't like when I drink the bottle gets smaller. I want something firm to grab. So again, it's just a difference in opinion and personal preference. I tried it in training before I did the race, so I knew, hey, I'm not going to like the soft ones, but that's besides the point. What I would do is I would take both of my my bottles off of my hands before I got to the aid station. I'd unzip the pockets. I'd grab all my trash. I carried all of my fueling there. And then by the time I got into an aid station, like if somebody was, you know, a lot of times people will kind of run into the aid station with you and ask you if they could get anything. So if I could, I'd be like, here, catch, and just toss my bottles to people and say, you know, gnarly in this one, water in this one, whatever it is. And then I can go throw away my trash. And then by the time I'm done doing that, they already get my bottles back to me, you know? And then I know, okay, I'm going to put the one with gnarly on my left hand, water on my right hand. So that way, if I get hot and I spray myself with my right arm, just out of habit, I'm not going to get all sticky.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my, that's my go-to for sure. And that's something too, where when you're running with bottles, you'll almost notice that you want to have a little bit more of a tighter arm carriage like this. Because just like we talked about before, if your arms are long and wide and away from your chest and kind of swinging down by your hips, it's going to be super uncomfortable on your shoulders to carry that. But if you're kind of uptight like a Kenyan like this, you're not sloshing that mass around everywhere.
Right. I agree. And you mentioned something that is kind of my highlight a little is it's a great place to put your trash, right? Because after you eat a goo or whatever, you have a place to stick it right in your handheld, and then you can get rid of it at the aid station, which is nice too.
Absolutely. I suppose, do you have any other pros that we haven't talked about?
I think that's about
Mhm.
what I have, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've touched on some of this stuff too in the pack section. So I think that's a good idea of like what you get for the handheld. Again, like you got to know like how much water are you going to be needing for the race. Personally, just because it's on top of mind right now, I got Earth Day coming up, and we're going to have aid every, the main aid station, the start finish, every 5.2 miles, and then I think there's going to be another one halfway on course. So me personally, I'm not going to take a pack because I know that I'm not going to be in a situation where I'm more than a couple miles away from food or
Right.
hydration or other people. Um, so, taking a look at the course and the demands is going to be huge. I guess I would say my first con for the bottle is that when you, besides the fact that it's inefficient, kind of like we talked about before, when you unscrew and screw the top on so many times, you really got to make sure that it's an easily unscrewable top for other people, especially if you're going to trust them to fill up your bottles, right? Because I think we've all heard those horror stories where it's like, oh, like aid station volunteer was just trying to help me out. I gave him my bottles. They screwed it on wrong. And then I was down the trail having to mess with this thing and then it broke or whatever it is, or maybe I got gnarly all over me and I was sticky for the rest of the race. So personally, I have two bottles that I use all the time, and they're the exact same bottles. And no matter how bonked I am, no matter like if I'm paying attention or not, like I screw them on, they're good to go. You really have to try to not screw them on properly. So I know that when I give them to other people, like there's going to be a 99% chance that as long as they're paying attention, they can screw it on nice and tight, you
Right.
know?
I think a con for me is making sure like in training that you're practicing and maybe even practicing switching hands if you're only going to carry one, because it can give you some shoulder discomfort, I think, from just carrying it in that one arm for so long. So being able to switch it, which isn't a real great skill of mine because I really like it in my right hand, but I can, switch and carry it in my left for a while if I want to. Another funny story. I just got stories today, I guess. But my last race, I was running with this guy. He's running his first 50, and he was kind of, yeah, I think he was kind of in a low, but when he came up with me, we started talking and laughing. And then like the next miles went really super fast and we were having a great time. But while we were talking, he said at the last aid station, they lost his lid. So he didn't have his water carry. And that's all he came with. So I
Wow.
offered one of my lids, but he's like, no, because I was running the 100. He was running the 50. He's like, no, I'm going to be done a lot sooner than you. But I'm like, what are you going to do? Your water's just like slopping all over. You can't really run. So that's something I'd never really thought about, but he made it. But something to think
Wow.
about.
Yeah, that is crazy.
Yep.
Holy smokes.
Yep.
I guess like another anecdote that I have about like bottles in the hands would be, like again, going back to the practice with your equipment beforehand, those zippers, like a lot of the times, if you don't zip those zippers all the way, every like couple miles or every couple foot strikes, they'll just slowly unravel and then you'll spill whatever. And
Mhm.
just being a proponent of leave no trace and pick up trash. If I notice that something falls on the ground, I'm gonna pick it up. And when I was
Right.
at Kettle last year, I probably like dropped at least 50 fruit snack packages because I'm unzipping, I'm grabbing my fruit snacks, I eat them, I stuff it back in, but I don't zip the thing all the way. And about a
Right.
mile down the road, it's like I notice like something fall
Yep.
into the ground, and
Yep.
it's like when you're 80 miles into a race, like you do not want to bend down on the ground to pick something up. You don't want
Right.
to stop. You just want to keep
Exactly. You
going.
can barely get back up.
Yeah.
Again, at my last race, I had a really great pacer and she's pacing me and she's bending down constantly. She's picking up all of the trash as she paces me. I'm like, what a brilliant idea. She's cleaning up. I'm still running, and at this point of the race, it was later in the race. I wasn't moving as fast, so she could catch up and, then
Yeah.
get rid of some of the garbage. So that's one thing you can do too.
Oh,
Yep.
plus one to that pacer and any pacer who takes that strategy while
Yep.
maintaining like, like communication with their runner. That's
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah. It was
Um,
great.
Perfect. I guess one last thing about bottles. So we mentioned hard and soft flasks. What the strategy that I've used before, especially at Wasatch, that I found pretty nice was I know that there's going to be points in the race where even though I was carrying 1.5 liters, which is probably enough for me to go like 3 to 4 hours, I know that at points it would be so hot that I would want to stop at an aid station and guzzle a bunch of
Yeah.
water, and we all
Yep.
know that that's kind of a bad race strategy, because then you're going to leave, you're going to have a full belly. Maybe you need to eat some food, but you're kind of sloshing around.
And you're sloshing, not your bag anymore. Now it's you.
So what I did was I had this separate flask that was about 15, 16 ounces, and I kept it collapsed in the back of my bag. So like I didn't use that except for when I would aid station up. I would fill the flasks up here first. And let's say if it was like 15 miles between there and the next aid station, I would fill up the handheld soft flask maybe about halfway, just like 10 ounces, especially if I was like really, really thirsty. So that way I wouldn't have to guzzle everything at the aid station. I would leave thinking, okay, I have a ton of water and I'm going to drink it all from this soft flask that's in my hand first. So that way in 20, 30 minutes, I can just tuck that away, forget I even have it. And now I still have all the rest of my gear. So sometimes those soft flasks can be used in conjunction with other means of hydration as kind of like a backup.
Right. Yeah, that's a great idea. I have another, could be con. I mean, maybe it's just me and I'm a little crazy, but, and I'll accept that, but I do get a little nervous on more technical courses, carrying handheld, worrying about falling and not having hands, my hands around the bottle. So just something.
Wow. Yeah. So that's funny to hear that though, because in my eyes, I'm like, if I have this hard thing on my hands, it's like a pillow when I land,
There you go.
Like,
that's true.
I have dirt stains on my bottle, and there's places on the caps where it's like, no matter how hard I scrub, like that dirt stain is always going to be there because I go down and it's like, well, at least I didn't skid my hands on the ground,
Right. Right. So we
awesome.
talked. Yeah. And then there was another thing we talked about. Oh, I just lost my train of thought. Go ahead.
Okay, no, that's totally fine. I guess the next one that I wanted to talk about isn't really like a piece of gear, but it's just the idea of like, shout out to Andy Colbert. He is an OMR racer. He comes to all the races. I saw him out at Wasatch last year. He's just a great soul. I see him at a bunch of events around here, but he's notorious for, in a lot of races, just using the aid stations. I mean, he'll do like 100 Ks, 100 miles. And in some of them, he will just go and drink and, eat food at the aid stations, drink at the aid stations, and then keep going. I think, now I could be wrong at this, but I think that was his strategy for Kettle last year. I don't know if he did the 100K or the 100 mile, but anyways, the idea has always stuck with me as something that's out of the ordinary, super interesting, but can also have its pros and its cons. So I guess what are the pros for you about not going in with any type of carrying capacity?
So I guess not knowing, I wouldn't like to have the unknown of what's going to be at that next aid station. And so that would be a big con for me. And I like to have some to be able to self-support myself, because what if I planned my 5 miles was going to take 45 minutes, but what if it ends up taking an hour and 15 for some reason, and then I'm out, I have nothing with me? That would be my concern.
Absolutely. And, I think a pro would be that, like he's told me before, it's like, we can complicate, like running is very simple, right? As far as gear and whatnot, compared to like cycling or other, outside adventure sports. But the idea of, okay, let's just strip everything down. Let's just go with shoes and clothing on our backs and see what is possible. I think that kind of ethos is pretty beautiful for me. And I think that it makes you tackle that race a little bit differently. Instead of thinking, I'm going to go out for performance, thinking I'm going out for adventure and to see what I can do with my body, given these constraints, like these artificial constraints that I put on myself.
Right. And I think it would definitely less complicate, because sometimes we spend so much time prepping for all of the stuff that we're going to take to race an ultra. And, it would just kind of take that and make it a little bit more mindless and just adventurous, like you said. I did think of the one thing I was going to say is, I'm just going to back up just a second. I think a pro to like the flasks that you can see is that your crew can also monitor and make sure you're taking in all of your hydration, especially, if they're see-through. When you come into the aid, they can see. Sometimes I get busted for that and I'm forced to drink the rest of my bottle before I get new ones, so I think that that's a good way to do that too.
Yeah, that is fantastic. Okay, so I didn't want to spend too much time on not going in with anything, because I think, all in all, it's not the smartest idea. I think it has a really cool aesthetic, but I just wanted to touch on it really quick. I guess the last thing that I would like to discuss would be waist belts and then a combination of using everything, right? Because we don't have to limit ourselves to just a pack. A lot of times I'll go out with a pack and a waist belt or any combination of such. So I know that there's a bunch of different types of waist belts. They have the ones that are like naked that are very tight against your torso. They're not really meant to carry heavy things, but like say if you wanted to stuff a goo in on the side pouch, your phone on the back pouch, or even your poles, like on the back, a lot of them have pole hookups. You can. And then they make some belts like Ultraspire has, I believe it's Carl Meltzer's signature, where it actually has like bottle cages on the back. So that way you can hold like 2 20-ounce bottles and it's got like a little, for lack of a better word, like fanny pack on the back.
Yeah, my friend runs in one of those, really, really likes it.
Yeah. So what are the pros and cons in your opinion?
So in my opinion, I've tried a lot of those different things, the hard cage, the flip belts, and my issue has always been I get a ton of chafing because it does not stay in place on my waist. And next thing you know, it's up on my rib cage, so it's not staying where it's supposed to. So that's a huge con for me. And I like to run with as little on me as possible. And I feel like that just is just a little too much for me to have as far as weight right around my waist. But I will say, the other thing I've tried is the Running Rabbit Bashams, Smash and Bashams, and I think that those are great. They stay in place. I'm able to put my nutrition in there, and I can sneak in a water bottle if I want to.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I wanted to use the belts in conjunction with the idea of using multiple modalities, just because that's the way that I kind of see them. Is unless you're doing like a shorter ultra or you have a lot of access to aid, they're not always the best solo construction. There are some that can take smaller collapsible flasks in the back, but there's no way to make it so fitted that there's not going to be a little bit of bouncing in the water no matter where you put it. So I'm actually looking up right now the waist belts that Ultraspire has, because I've been using one by them. Fitted race belt. They now have a fitted race belt 2.0. I'm actually using the older 1.0 version. And I've had that thing for years. I think I had it for like a year and a half or so, even before last kettle race. So I've been using it for 2 years. I use it on like all of my runs, even if I don't need it. Because if I'm listening to music, like I turn the belt like so that my phone just sits in the back of like my low back, and I'm good to go, hands free. Like I can run a steaming hard workout and not have to worry about losing my phone, not have to worry about it bouncing up and down too much. But I'll also use those like with packs, so that way I can carry my phone kind of closer to my body and keep it warm, especially if it's cold out. Then put my my jacket over, and then a vest over top of that, just to make sure that like I have my phone on me, but it's not going to be like exposed to the elements, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So yeah, shout out to Ultraspire's fitted race belt 2.0. So with this code that we're going to be bringing up here in a couple minutes, that would be a great purchase just to be an adjunct for everybody's everyday run, or if you're going to use it with your pack, even if you don't tuck anything in it, just to have that extra space is super cool. So that's my personal preference. I've never used one with the bottles that actually fit on the back. But yeah, for me, I don't like things pulling down on my waist, because if things are around my pelvic stabilizers, like my glute med, even just like my glute max or anything, like those are your glute max is one of your primary uphill propellers. So I wouldn't necessarily want something kind of getting in the way of just letting those glutes do their thing. But then again, I've never tried it, so who knows? Maybe that's my secret sauce, So it would definitely.
My last 2 races, I used the Basham shorts where I put all of my nutrition in, and then I hand carried, and that seems to have been like the best couple races I've had of being able to manage my hydration and nutrition. Felt like it gave me good access to both. And so I also kept up really well on it. It wasn't too much work getting things out.
Yeah, and that's exactly how me and Phil tackled our Hennepin 50-mile race last year. So shout out to Phil.
Is he peanut butter jelly the whole what are they, Uncrustables the whole time? That's his secret sauce.
I've heard that from a couple podcasts with him, but I as far as I could tell, I was behind him the whole way. Like I couldn't see any Uncrustables falling out of his pack. I got to hit him out because whatever he was using, it was a good system. But he had the same thing. It was like one of those fitted waist belts and then 2 handhelds. So that's definitely a super viable option for people. And again, like, if you don't know if you're going to like a particular like modality or way of carrying your hydration and gear, if you have somebody who can lend you some gear, like the trail community is always down to help each other out. If you're going to borrow something for a little bit, just to see if you kind of like it, that would be awesome. And right now we're kind of at that point in training where we still have, even if you're training for the next OMR race, which is Earth Day, you still got a couple weeks to kind of dial that in a little bit more. And I know personally me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go park at Veteran Acres and, on 1 or 2 of these long runs that I have and just practice having a bottle at the aid station, having a bottle in my hand and just doing loops and switching back and forth and just seeing if it works well for me.
Right. So another strategy that we haven't talked about that I use, because again, I like to do the 24-hour track ultras. So in those, I'm not wearing a vest typically or hand carrying as little as possible. So I will often just have small cups, either the collapsible disposable cups, and my, I have crew, so they're filling them up. So I know that I need to take like a shot is like 5 ounces every, 15 minutes or whatever to keep up on my hydration. So that's another, strategy that you can use besides just hand carrying or using the vests.
That's huge. And that's a really good viewpoint that you have, because personally, I haven't done a lot of these looped or track, 6, 8, 12, 24-hour races. So yeah, that is a great strategy. And I remember last year we kind of employed that with your 6 days in the dome. You were doing, you attempted the 24-hour.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, like that's a great way to just keep track too. And I think you had us too at your aid station table, kind of checking off like, okay, She had this much, she had that much, just making sure that you try to hit your numbers as best as you can.
Right.
So
keeping me honest, so I don't argue with my crew that I didn't drink what I was supposed to.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the last thing that we can mention is the use of water filters or not. So they have water filters that are standalone, like they have the Sawyer Minis where you hook up a little bag on the back and then, that has your dirty water and you squeeze it through into a bottle that has a cleaner water. It's probably more ubiquitous in the backpacking and like solo adventure type of endeavors. But as far as like coming to racing, it's definitely viable and something to think about. Like if you're going to be in the backcountry for any extended period of time. And I know Catadine or is it Catadine?
Pocodona that's coming up?
No, the bottle company that has the inline filter. I think it's Catadine, right?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
That's okay. So that's an interesting technique because it's just a bottle that has an inline filter. So you fill up the bottle and the bottle has dirty water, but then as you squeeze and it comes through the nozzle, it filtrates or it filters and you're drinking clean water, even if the water in the bottle is dirty. So although I don't see that necessarily being like a critical component to a lot of our racing, there are some races out in Colorado, out in Utah, maybe out in Arizona too, where, like if you're doing 100 miles and there's only aid station access, like every 20 or every 20 miles, say like at Hard Rock or something, but you're going to be passing a lot of streams. If you don't want to carry a ton of water, then you have the option to fill up its streams and get water that way.
Right.
So I don't want to spend too long on that topic just because I don't think it necessarily pertains to a lot of what we do around here. But if anybody has any further questions, hit us up, shoot us a DM, and we can kind of talk that through with you a little bit more. So, but I think we covered hydration and gearing pretty comprehensively, starting from packs to handhelds to different types of bottles, pros and cons of everything. And of course, we didn't touch on everything. So I'm sure as people are listening to this, they're screaming at their headphones saying, they didn't even talk about this pro or this con, So if you guys want to drop any comments in our Facebook comments on this video, feel free. We always love to get other people's takes and opinions. So, as promised, we have a listener question and answer coming up. So Loretta, do you want to read
For sure.
what question we got?
Yes, we have a great question submitted by Jessica Lomax. And it's a kind of a big one. So are you ready, Reese?
Yeah, totally.
Okay. When you are training for a goal race, how do you still incorporate strength training, rest, and stretching when your volume increases? And I think that's a really good question, because I think a lot of people struggle with this, right? Is one going to go, both going to go, or I'm going to try to maintain all of them? So what do you think?
Absolutely. The first thing I would ask any athlete is, where are you at in your training and when is your next race? So let's say if you have an end of April race coming up, we have about like 3 or 4 weeks. Now is probably not the time to incorporate an excess amount of strength training if you haven't already built up towards it, right? Because we have 3 to 4 weeks. Really, anything that we do is just going to be more stress on the body. It's not, you're not necessarily going to be able to see strength or durability increases in the last few weeks, right? I would still recommend somebody, if they came to me and were like, hey, I got a race at the end of April, but I want to start strength training, I would say, you know what? There is nothing wrong with doing a lot of body weight maneuvers and taking your joints through a range of motion that running doesn't allow, right? Like when we do squats, we're going to be working on our durability, we're going to be working on our strength, and our overall lifestyle ability to get up and down off of the ground. So I think that for any runner, like, doing squats, doing some just hip hinging, a couple weeks before a race, if they're fairly novel to strength training, is absolutely fine. Doing planks, doing bridges, doing more muscular activation work, that is okay. But let's say somebody comes to me and they say, yeah, I have about 8 to 12 weeks before my next race. Let's say you're shooting for Galena Sky Race at the end of May. I would say, you know what? We have enough time to incorporate this strength training, and we have time to make mistakes. Hopefully we don't. But of course, when we add any type of novel stimulus to the body, there is a chance that you can get sore and not be able to do your running workouts accordingly. So, but with about 8 to 12 weeks, that's enough time to begin a strength training program and just know, hey, we can keep this consistent. And hopefully by the time your race is here, you already have some sort of routine that you're doing that you know what, I can knock this out and not be sore. And a day from now, I can get back and I can run my running workout hard and not have any repercussions. So hopefully, to get back to the question, hopefully when you decide to start increasing your running volume, you already have some sort of routine that you've been working on that is no longer demanding from you. So in the off season is when I will incorporate strength training into athletes' routines, so that way they can work for a month or two with the strength training routine and keeping their running volume a little bit lower. So that way, by the time we get to spring and we start really turning up the dials on running intensity or volume, now they have had so many weeks where their strength training is just a typical routine. They just knock it out, check the boxes, get the muscular activation, and they don't have any residual soreness from their workouts. So I would say that by the time you start increasing your volume, you should know how your strength training is impacting your running.
Okay, great. Good answer. And I agree. I do think that it just becomes something that you do because we want to make sure that we stay healthy and able to race. I think, realizing it's not just an extra, it's a really important part of your training is to do mobility and strength and have recovery days. So if we choose that we're going to remove those, we may be making the choice that we may not make it to race day as healthy as we could if we were making sure we were incorporating all of that. And so and I also think sometimes it seems like so much. So when I first start with athletes, we talk about this. We talk about what kind of things that they've been doing. Are they doing mobility or strength or, so I kind of have an idea. And some people just really need to build some consistency. So we may take a little time and I kind of baby step some of those pieces in there so that they're not feeling overwhelmed all at once, right? So I believe mobility is really important. So I make sure that starts out with our running and then give that a little bit of time. And then I start incorporating some strength within the next few weeks, depending on where they are, in their training as well. But I think as you do that, you can kind of build it in. And I also think thinking about different ways you can build it into your life. So I have an athlete that was really having trouble wanting to get in some core strength. He's like, I just don't have time. Well, core strength doesn't take a lot of time if you're doing just like some planks and, side planks, front planks, bridges, right? So I'm like, what about at your lunch? You have an office. So at lunchtime, take a few minutes and do it. And now he's like, that was magic. And he's been doing it for months like that, like, okay, yeah, that fit into my schedule. So I think thinking about those kind of things, there are different things I think we can do to make it work functionally in our day rather than making it an extra step that it makes it difficult.
Absolutely. Yep. And we can also say too that, we're runners looking to use strength training as a performance benefit, right? Like if we take that mindset, then of course, if your volume increases in your running, you're going to want to put more eggs in that basket, and you might want to decrease your strength
Right.
training volume to just like a maintenance type of once a week or so. So that way you can make sure that you show up for those running workouts accordingly, because strength training isn't going to make you a faster runner in and of itself. This is known. If you increase your squat max or your deadlift max, whatever it is, that doesn't mean that you're going to be, winning your next race of choice. What it means is that you are going to have more capable muscles that can absorb higher training loads in running. So running more is going to make you a faster athlete. It's going to make you a better athlete. So if you can build the durability with strength training, so that way you can train more, that's where the money is made. If we
Right.
take it into account of like, okay, so maybe not all of us are looking for the performance that I just mentioned. Maybe we're all looking for, health and longevity. Then maybe, we don't do a lot of heavy strength training, but we do a lot of those movements still in your program, such as squats with lighter weight, just to make sure we're getting in that range of motion work with your legs, doing lateral work to make sure that we get your hip muscles, doing core work just to make sure that you're like a well-rounded athlete and
Right.
healthy human being.
Right. I
Um,
agree. I think that, we like to periodize that sort of in your training from where you're at in your training for your race. And so I think Coach Reese is absolutely right. We're looking at off season. We might be really stepping up that volume, a little bit of strength training. But then as we're nearing that race, that's kind of coming down. So that's going to be taking a little less time while your running volume can take up that little slack, because we already have that built into our training week of how much time we're already spending. So it kind of is a little bit of a give and take, I think, at that point. And I think we really need to think about, I love that you said longevity, because I think that's super important, is especially, I'm an aging athlete. I want to make sure that I stay healthy, not just for running, but for life in general, for being able to move. I think functional movements are so important to be able to be healthy and be able to function in our day-to-day lives, because those are movements that we do daily, and we want to make sure that we can keep doing those. So I think
Absolutely.
that that's, important.
Yep. So, long story short, it depends on what time of the year you have, what your strength training goals are, as well as what your background is. And have you built up to this point where you can increase your running volume because your strength training is no longer taxing on you? So with that being said, I just have a quick anecdote just because it's top of mind. I just got off the phone with another athlete. His name is Luke. He's going to be coaching with OMR. So welcome, Luke. Um, he is working towards 120K later in September this year. So he's coming back from some injury. We're going to build him back nice and slow. But with that being said, he's running 3 days a week and doing strength training and mobility 4 days a week. So what that looks like is, we're slowly starting to build that running volume back because he has a running related injury. He's feeling good right now, but I just want to make sure that that time that he already carved out of his busy life is not spent on, just rest, because he wants to be doing stuff in the gym, right? So at this point in our season, we have a lot of time to play with. So we don't need to be so strict on saying we need to be running more than strength training. So we're going to be doing some strength training and some stability stuff through the next couple of weeks, and we're going to slowly build into heavier work. But then once we get in about the 8 weeks out from his main race, once we get to about there, we're going to be scaling way back on the strength training, because he's going to need more energy to put into volume and intensity so that he can be prepared for that race. So the idea is for the next 8 weeks here, we're going to be building a durable body for him so that way it can handle that more volume and that more intensity later on down his season. So that's just a quick example of how, I just structured somebody's season so that way he can start off slow and he doesn't start off being too taxed from either the running or the strength training, and we can slowly build and make him stronger in for a good latter half of the year here.
Thank you. And thank you, Jessica, for that question. I think Coach Reese and I could probably deliberate about this for the rest of the day, but we're going to stop and we're going to move on. So we promised that we were going to give you a code at the end of the show. This is for the Ultraspire products on the Ornery Mule Racing website. And the code is Hydrate 20 for 20% off of UltraSpire gear. So if you'd like to get some of that, head on over to the OMR store and look up the UltraSpire, and it's Hydrate 20. So thanks for coming to the show today. It was great talking with you, of course, as always, Reese, and can't wait to share about my race next week. So
yeah, I can't wait to hear about it. Best of luck this weekend. Again, your hair looks great. So if you're only listening on the podcast version, go onto YouTube, go onto Facebook, take a look, wish Loretta well, and we'll see you next week.
all right, thanks. Bye.